Would you like to know how to draw this simple sunset using pastel pencils? In this tutorial, I'll explain how I created this piece step by step. I'm Kirsty Rebecca and I make drawing and painting tutorials that are easy to follow even if you're just starting out. Today I'm using Faber Castell Pitt Pastels, but you can use any pastel pencils that you have. And I'm working on Clairefontaine Pastel Mat, which is kind of like a sanded paper with a very fine tooth. You can use other papers as well, but I find this paper is really useful for adding more layers because it grips the pastel. But it's not too rough that it leaves a really grainy result in the end. And I've chosen to work on this light dusty red colour, but you can do this with white or any colour that you have as well. It's a little bit easier with this colour because you can use that red to your advantage and let some of the paper show through. But if you are working on white or another colour, you'll just want to make sure that you fill up those areas with the pastel instead so it's the right colour. I've started off by transferring my image to my paper using transfer paper, but this is quite a simple image, so you're welcome to do it freehand with a pastel pencil if you like. So I've chosen to start by blocking in the sun with a white pencil, and this is the brightest part of the piece. If you look at the reference photo, which I'll link in the description for you if you did want to follow along, it's pretty much just white. If you have an area in your artwork that you know you want to keep white or another really light colour, then make sure that you only put that colour down instead of muddying up your artwork by putting other colours down first. It's much easier to keep it that really bright colour if you just use that white pencil or the really light coloured pencil. And I'll continue around the sun and the rest of the sky with yellows and oranges and reds, paying attention to the reference photo to make sure that I get them in roughly the right spot. It doesn't have to be exact, but close is good. And don't worry too much if you can see a grainy texture in your artwork. We will be blending it out, so that'll smooth itself out in the end. If you've watched any of my other pastel tutorials, I talk about layering darker colours first and then going in with a lighter colour over the top to create the details, especially with fur, so that your details will show up. But in this case, the entire piece can be done almost as a paint by number. So you'll put some blending and layering into it, but it's not as complicated as starting with an animal, and it's a relatively easy piece to start working with pastel pencils as a beginner. So you're almost just putting the right color in the right spot and then blending your colors together as you go. So if you're new to pastels, this is a really good way to get a feel for the medium and how they blend and how they look when you layer in certain ways and that kind of thing. When you're working with pastel pencils, just be mindful of how you're putting your strokes down with your pencil, because if you want a really smooth area, you want to make sure that you're going in really tight, small circles so that you can't see any of the pencil strokes in the end. Whereas in the sky here, I'm purposely doing longer strokes that go across the piece because the sunset is sort of coming through the clouds in the sky. So you want to give that impression of the horizontal lines in the sky, and the pencil strokes can do that for you. So you can use that technique to your advantage, but if you are trying to get an area really smooth, just try and do really tight little circles with your pencil. And we'll use this technique a little bit in the ocean below when we get to it. And when you're working with pastels, it's pretty much just a layering process. So you would have seen me go back and add other colors on top of other colors in the sky. So I've added some oranges and yellows on top of the reds and vice versa, just to give it a bit more interest and a bit more depth as well. So I'm moving on to the area where the mountains are on the horizon line, and towards the top they're almost like a dark blue color, and then they fade down into a really dark color that's almost black. So I'm starting with the blue along the top, and then I'll go through with the darker colour at the bottom just to be able to blend them together. And don't forget to include that little reflection from the sun onto the mountains as well. It's really quite a bright orange. For most of this piece, it doesn't matter if your pencils are really sharp or not. In fact, you'll save a lot of your pastel pencil if you sharpen them less, because they tend to break in a normal pencil sharpener and you can easily sharpen away a lot of your pencil that way. I usually sharpen mine with a craft knife, and then if I need really fine details in the final layers, I'll use a manual crank handle sharpener. I'll leave a link in the description about sharpening pastel pencils in case you're struggling with it, because I know that I struggled with it for a long time when I first started. Moving on to the ocean, I'm following the general areas of the lighter blue and the darker blue from my reference photo, and I'm ignoring the dark plant stems that sit in front of the ocean because they'll go on top afterwards. Make sure that you're looking at your reference photo more than your artwork to make sure that your darker blues and your lighter blues are in the right spot. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try and get them the right width and the height across your page, because Where the water is on the horizon line, it will most likely have thinner lines and sections than what's closer to you because of distance. And this is another area where you want to try and make sure that you're laying your pencil strokes down in a horizontal direction across the page, because it will follow the direction of the ocean ripples. Even though we'll be blending this out, your strokes will show through at the end of your piece, and you'll rather have them going in the right direction than having strokes going up and down your piece. And once you finish blocking in the color over the ocean, you'll want to start blending out your piece. I'm actually using a blending stump, but if you don't have one of those, you can use your fingers, or you can wrap a tissue around your finger as well to blend it that way. And a lot of the time I actually use cotton tips, which I always have around the house. They're really inexpensive and they're a great size, especially if you're trying to get into smaller areas. And I usually jump around my piece a lot, so I'll go back and forth between different colors, adding different colors in different areas to brighten up some areas, or go back and make it look more saturated. It's up to you how you work, but I just prefer doing it this way, where I build up the colors as I go along. Whereas other artists like to start in one corner and complete that until it's completely finished, and then move on across the page and then down the page. Whereas I like to be able to see my piece progress all in one go as a whole. And a good tip when you're using cotton buds to blend, or when you're using anything really, make sure that you use a clean cotton tip in between each area. So if you're blending with the cotton tip in an orange area, you don't want to use that same cotton tip to blend the blue area, because it will actually muddy up your colors and make it look really not as vivid as it would if you just used a separate cotton tip to blend all the different areas. If you find that you're getting a lot of pastel on your hands, or you're smudging your artwork with your hands, you can lay a piece of paper across your artwork to rest your hand on, so that way you don't smudge the artwork as you go along. So you probably would have noticed that I let some of the paper show through in the water, and this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the piece, where I chose this color specifically so that I didn't have to fill in the entire piece of paper with pastel. I could use that paper and let some of that color show through. But if you are working on a white piece or another color, just choose a color that looks similar to the color in your reference photo and then fill it in with that color. It doesn't make much of a difference to the final product. Once you finish blending out your first layer, you can then repeat the process with your colors to fill in more of the grain of the paper and smooth it out. The colors don't have to be exactly the same as the previous layer. In fact, it will give more depth if you put slightly different colors down or overlap them slightly. Just remember to keep your oranges and your blacks and blues pretty separate so they don't muddy up the next colors into it too much. I've taped my paper down to some foam board, but you can tape it down to your desk or a drawing board if you like. And the reason that I do this is to keep the paper flat and stop it from curling up around the edges. But also, once you've completed your artwork and you've removed the tape, there's a nice border that you can hold on to afterwards without having to touch the artwork itself. So when I'm measuring out my paper to start with, I always add a 1/2 inch border extra to the outside of the paper so that it has that border in addition to the size of the artwork. For example, this is a 6 inch by 8 inch piece, so I'll cut my paper to 7 by 9 so that I have 1/2 inch border around each side of the piece. Once you've added your second layer of color, you can go ahead and blend that out as well. And there are a few benefits to blending out your layers. One is that it smooths the pastel out and makes it look less grainy. It also blends the colors together for smoother transitions, and it blends the pastel into the tooth of the paper, which allows you to add more pastel on top. So if you let the pastel just sit on the surface, it can be a bit hard to layer more colors on top, as the loose dust is preventing more pastel from sticking to the tooth of the paper. And I haven't listed out the exact colors I'm using as I go, because it doesn't really matter that much if your main goal is realism. You just need to make sure that your darks are dark enough and your lights are light enough. I could create this piece in black and white and it will still look realistic. So just pick the color that looks close to the reference photo. It's a much better way to learn how to draw or paint if you choose your own colors, and that way you can work from any reference photo you like, and it will get easier over time to pick out those colors. Moving on to adding those dark stems, I'm using a mixture of a really dark blue and black pencil to add the stems. Mixing the two colors together means that you're not going in and adding straight black to your piece. If you have black in an area by itself, it can tend to make the piece look a little bit dull, but if you add another color with it, like blue or purple or red, depending on what your color scheme of your piece is, then it can help make it look more vibrant and actually make it look like a more deeper black. And when adding your stems, they don't have to be 100% accurate, but make sure that you vary the length of your stems, the thickness, the direction, and where they stop and start, and also which way they bend. So if you have them all going in the same direction and stopping and starting at the same height, they'll look really unrealistic because in nature, it's really varied. They don't just line up like a little picket fence. And I've kept the bulk of my stems to the right-hand side of the page so that it doesn't block out the sunset too much. Once you've mapped out where all your stems are going, make sure that you go back in and make some of the stems look a little bit thicker, and this gives the illusion that some stems are sitting in front of others. And then you can go back through and add some of the details on the stems. And remember to vary the details, so don't put the thicker leafy kind of areas on every single stem because it won't look very natural. I'm putting some halfway down the stems and some on top of the stems, but make sure that you make it a little bit more random because that's how it would be in nature. If you have any plants that overlap really close to the sun, like I have in this one, make sure that you blend out the bit that is close to the sun and add a bit of orange or red to it because the light from the sun in real life will overpower the black because of its brightness, so you won't see it as dark as some of the other stems. It's little details like that which will make your paintings stand out and look a little more realistic. And then I'm going through and softly blending some of the grania looking lines with a cotton tip and fixing some of the areas in the background by adding some more pastel pencil where I think it needs it. If you enjoyed this tutorial, I've created a playlist on the screen that I thought you'd like, so click on that and I'll see you over there.